Kia ora, tēnā koutou pōneke whānui, tēnā rā koutou katoa, hei mihi nui tēnei kia tātou katoa. I'm Mary McCallum, as you've heard, the director of Cuba Press, and we published The Fairer Side of Buxton by Clare Gleeson 2 weeks ago at launch. Claire, I can't quite believe that. Do you want to hold your copy up, just, flash it around, although you've seen it coming in? And we also have a side hustle as a publisher typesetting other small publishers' books. So we typeset Kate Mahony's, which was published by Cloud Inc. in Auckland, another small, wonderful press, yeah. So that's, did you hold it up long enough, Kate? I don't think so. I think that was a little flash only. Now, these look like wildly different books. Oh, you can see them actually beautifully displayed by Emmett of Marsden Books, who I should have said hello to as well. And you obviously books to buy at the end, not in the middle, but at the end do that, and these lovely authors can sign them. And thank you also to the library, of course, for hosting us. Really, it's a gorgeous space. I do like the setup here at Karori Library. And I also love Karori Library because my mum used to work here, and I remember coming, well, not this building actually, a much older one, so it's always nice to come back. As I say, wildly different looking books, but they both have something in common. They're written by women who are obviously very interested in the history of Aotearoa, about the lives of people in this country at a certain time in our history, or certain times in our history. One is non-fiction, therefore true, and one is fiction, therefore a lie, or you might prefer made up. I don't know, what do you say? Whatever. It's a lie made up, It's not, in other words, true in the true sense of the word. And yet they have similarities too, more than you may realise, in that they, and we'll hopefully, explore that today. So as I say, both authors were inspired to write about history. Both went about researching the times and the people that they were keen to write about and set down those words on paper. So I thought we might start with each of them telling us in a nutshell, and I've told them 3 or 4 sentences because authors can go on quite a long time about their beloved books. So you've got me here. Actually, I find Claire, actually, you are very precise. So I'm Kate, maybe not so, but it's okay. I know these two quite well. I've been to a few of their events. So Claire, we'll start with you then as a prime example how to do this, that we want, in a nutshell, what's your book about?
My book is about the New Zealand garden designer, Alfred Buxton, who operated in New Zealand from the beginning of the 20th century to about 1940. And I look at him through the lens of women. So women who commissioned his garden, women who lived in his gardens, women who grew up in his gardens, and gardens that had a strong association with women. For example, the Queen Mother stayed in one of the gardens, well, in the house, the garden. So that's my book.
Yeah, nice, see? Yeah, nutshell. Right, Kate, off you go.
So my book starts with a young woman in Melbourne walking to work and is accosted by a rather strange-looking man who's quite distinctive, and he tells her that her grandfather in New Zealand has a problem, needs her help. Her immediate thing is she doesn't have a grandfather, she only has her mum and her. They did come from New Zealand at one point, so for various reasons she heads over to New Zealand, meets a very unwelcoming old man, and finds out there are things going wrong for him on the farm, and that will lead you back into history, is all I can tell you, 1860s history.
Well, nice one, Kate. Good work. So, as you said, almost immediately, very, very different. So, Claire, where did you come across Alfred Buxton, and what inspired you to think you would want to spend literally hundreds of hours researching this person and writing about him? And then also all the hours we put into the book, making it. Yeah, off you go.
Actually, that's a depressing way of putting it. Hundreds of hours, God. You're right, though, probably thousands. Well, I like gardening and I like history, and I was looking around for some sort of New Zealand gardening great, like England had Capability Brown, Gertrude Jekyll, Australia had Edna Walling, who I really like, and the US had Beatrix Ferrand and others. So I thought, who is New Zealand's great? And I read some very good history of gardening in New Zealand and Googled and found Alfred Buxton, and then found that there hadn't been that much written about him, and that he had, been a huge figure in gardening history, and that he deserved to be more illuminated. And I got really interested. So I started initially looking at his rose gardens through Heritage Roses New Zealand, and then extended it to look at his gardens, and it just became bigger and bigger. And that's sort of how I got started.
But you're a historian. You've already written a book about Begg's music.
I have,
People
yeah.
remember Begg's music shops. So you knew what was involved, no doubt, in terms of the hundreds of hours of work sort of thing, but you still went into it.
I did.
Yeah.
Well, I think with those sorts of things, you start gradually and they become more obsessive as you go. It was just going to be the roses, and then you think, I'll just look at a couple of gardens, and before you know it, you're going across New Zealand looking at them. And, I found 350 gardens. I certainly didn't visit that many, but there were probably more. But it just became like, it's a bit like a detective story, and you just keep going down that hole, burrowing, until you actually do say, I've just got to stop. But, even today I had an email from someone saying they knew about a garden or something that they didn't think I'd know about. And I probably don't, so there might even be a sequel.
Yeah, that always happens, isn't it? Once the book's out,
Yeah.
suddenly people will be contacting you with all the bits you've missed. But you just have to say, book's done.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Follow up maybe. So Kate, for you, was it the historical story that drew you in first, or did you start writing a contemporary story and the historical came to you?
So I started with a story about a young girl whose father was Irish, or her parents, and set it on a farm. So I started with this girl. I had already had a story in Best New Zealand Fiction that covered the same territory. And I noticed that I had written quite a few things, like one short story called The Greenstone. So there was the girl, and then it sort of came to me that she met a stranger on the farm in New Zealand, and then I had to sort of think about who was the stranger and why. And then I realised that for the Irish Embassy, I'd been writing up some information about my mother's side of the family coming to New Zealand. And my great-grandmother's brother had come out to the Otago goldfields, got recruited to the English army, and in time, well, there were a couple of things we know about him, but not much. In time, he got given the 50 acres of land that the government decided to pay people who were in the army because they didn't have any other money. So they said, you can have this land and so forth. So he got 50 acres and started farming it. He then got TB and died, and he'd actually written a will leaving the farm to my great-grandmother back in Ireland. So that they, got on a boat with 5 kids, came out here. And the reason it was intrigued me was that we didn't know much about the soldier or the guy, Michael Begley. We just kept hearing, due to my grandfather telling my mother, stories about the Kavanagh family arriving in this Okato and speaking Gaelic. So we had that sort of story, but we didn't have his story. And rather than go online and try and find people who were Begleys in the 1860s Ireland, I decided to invent my character, just keep the name, but my character was much younger, about 19.
So was this a way for you to explore your family history?
I wasn't doing it deliberately. I'd say it inspired it rather than exploring it, because once I had the person, my book's nothing like the person, if you see. So I could have really, I'd done a lot of family history over time. I could have written a non-fiction book about this person, but actually I was more into some other aspects rather than the historical, more that he does something wrong and he needs to sort of repent, if you look at it in a Christian sort of way. He does something to his friend and that hangs over him. So that's sort of the floating through the book, is that, yeah.
Were you worried about the research that you would have to do once you'd settled on a historical theme?
I've sort of done a lot of journalism, so I'm used to looking up things and then weaving in the comment that you got from someone and then a bit of factual stuff. So I reckon I've done a lot of that, plus the family history. So although I'm not, a trained researcher, I'm pretty good at it. Yeah.
So you looked forward to it. It was interesting.
I think what first happened was I had this Michael, and he was in the camp, and then I thought, I wonder what uniform they wore. Like I didn't even know what they wore. So that sort of took me to the library, at the National Library, and I also went to the one in Taranaki, New Plymouth. And one of the first things was some books that had photos, or if not photos, drawings. So it sort of developed from there, I think. The needing to know some small practical detail then made me think, well, what happened in the camp? Well, question.
Yeah, interesting. Could you pass back to Claire? Claire, did you go to England to sort of, because Alfred started out there. I think he came out here when he was 4. Was that, or very young
14,
anyway?
14.
14, sorry. Yep.
No, I actually did go to England. I didn't go to where he came from.
Okay.
But his early life had been very well covered in another book, extensively covered, in fact, going back several generations. So I felt I didn't really need to do that. But I did talk to his grandson and his wife, so I got the New Zealand side of the family. But yeah.
And went from there. Okay, I've got now a sort of quick yes, no, one-word answer section now, just to capture, because I know some of you might be dropping off a little bit with, what is it, 6:15? No, I'm joking. It's a bit like, yeah. Okay, shall we try that? Oh, you'll have to pass the thing back and forward.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Are you sitting close enough?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yes or no, did you start with... Oh, you can't say yes or no in the answer to this one. I don't think I'm a very, very good quiz master, to be honest. But, okay, did you start with writing or research?
Research.
Writing.
Nice. What was the first place you started researching? Where was the first? Was it online, a particular book, a place?
Online.
Right.
I'm pretty sure, because it was a while ago, National Library.
Nice answer. Did you find it easy or hard to find the information you wanted?
Hard.
Not too hard, because I asked a woman working there, and like all good library people, she came out with a big bunch of books. You had to just stay in the library to read them, I remember that. And I think I photocopied some of them, but you couldn't just borrow them and take them home, just saying.
So you got someone doing the work for you, Kate? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. What made it hard, Claire? You can say a few more words than one or two.
Well, there was a lot of sort of mystery and a lot of confused detail, a lot of misinformation, actually, because a lot of it was word of mouth that had been written down. It was inaccurate.
And misspelt.
As
we know, sorry.
Yeah, so it was that sort of thing. That's what made it difficult. Sifting out what was true and what wasn't.
Nice. And back to, did you say easy or hard? I can't remember that long answer you gave, Kate.
I don't even think I answered that one, did I? Gosh, I'm really going to get
I'm
sidetracked.
joking. I just know that you can be head on about these things. Anyway, what was it? What
Not
made
true,
it
not true.
easy? I think you did answer. It was the librarian made it easy
Yes,
for you.
thank you.
Nice, as a librarian should. Did you interview people, Claire?
Yes, lots of people, dozens. I wouldn't even know how many.
Great. Back to Kate.
Not per se, but because the book, can I dare say it, is set over 3 time periods in 3 countries, there was a lot of emailing of, say, a very knowledgeable person in Ireland and a professor of history, just to double-check my earlier 1860s Ireland. It's also in the 1970s New Zealand, and one character's come out from Ireland fleeing something. So I needed a bit of research around the IRA in the 70s, etc.
And so face-to-face, Zoom recordings, email, how did you do it?
Not Zoom. Face-to-face, I travelled a lot. Like I say, I did literally go from Hawke's Bay down to Invercargill, interviewing people. I rang, lots of telephone interviews, lots of emailing. Yeah.
So when you did face-to-face, was it on your phone or microphone? I mean, what did you record with? Or did you just take notes?
I record? Yeah. Both. I had my phone, then I bought a little gadget thing, but I didn't trust either of them, so I took notes as well. And I did shorthand, so my notes were fine.
Ah, cool. What about you, Kate?
Mainly email, and not a formal sort of thing, more like, example, how to get from North Kerry in the 1860s to Cork, where all the boats went from. Once you start thinking, you think, well, how did they get there? And the person in Ireland found something for me where there was a thing called the Butter Road, and there were lots of them all over Ireland, and they went directly, so people took carts with their butter tuned, and they went directly to Cork, to Queenstown, where the wharf was. So that my characters then went on one of those carts, they hitched a lift. So there are a lot of little detail you have to check. You think, oh, what was that? And then you have to get it right. So.
And then keep going deeper and deeper. Who was your first interviewee, Claire? Do you remember?
Jane Humble, who I think you know.
I do.
Yes.
Explain who she is.
Sorry? Oh, well, she's a friend of Bee's, who's over there. And Bee, I must have mentioned to Bee because Bee has written a book, History of Gardening of New Zealand, so she had made mention of Alfred Buxton, and I said to Bee I was looking at researching him, and she said Jane Humble grew up in a Buxton garden. So I got in touch with her and I interviewed her. So she was the first one. And I did go back and re-interview, if there is such a term, because when you start out, you're not really sure what you're looking for and what questions to ask. And as you go forward, you have a much better idea of what you're trying to establish. And she was great, and she provided lots of photos, also a painting that had been done of the property for her mother's birthday. That was my first.
That was a delightful interview.
It was, yeah, it was great.
It's one that actually was further on in the book when we started out, and then we moved it forward, didn't we?
Yes.
Because
yes.
it's such a delight to have grown up in that garden, you know, and her childlike perspective of it was the delight of a garden with lots of hidden spaces. And,
yes, and she was very sad to have to leave it when she was 14, I think. I think it was 14. They moved to another farm, so she had to leave. But so her memories were really lovely. They were basically her childhood about this amazing garden. And I did go up to see it, but it's basically gone. The entranceway was still there in the trees, but the rest of it was all gone, which is sad.
Oh, that is sad.
That's what happens.
What happens to gardens. Back to Kate. So your first interviewee.
I can't recall. I suspect it was the Irish person I did a lot of communicating with, and I wouldn't technically call it an interview in the sense that I just wrote. Like, I'll give you a small example. I realised through someone else that North Kerry had very good land and it was wealthy, and I was setting it in South Kerry, and then realised that it wouldn't fit my story. So. Because the big houses, they were actually in North Kerry, not South. So tiny little things like that you then have to check to get it right.
Very cool, yes, exactly. And go almost in circles sometimes, don't you, back and forward. So how long did you do your research, Claire, before you started writing? You said research first, yeah, that's right.
Well, I was doing this thing on roses, so I probably researched that for about 3 months, then I started writing. And by then I'd already gathered some of the other material that I used. But when I did my PhD, I remember my supervisor saying, just start writing. You know, you can research forever, but for goodness sake, just start putting something down on paper. And I sort of have always borne that in mind, really, that you can still add to things. Just because you've started writing, that doesn't mean that that's the end of research. So that's sort of the philosophy I had, and that's what I did.
So why do you think she said that, to get going?
I think she said that because I think only 1 in 4 people finish a PhD, because it's a huge amount of work, and it's a lot of it probably is in the writing. So at least if you make a start, you sort of, committed, I guess.
And you want to see it hopefully through to the end, yeah?
Yes.
You'd think so.
Yeah, so that was the approach I took with this as well.
So Kate, for you started writing, and so did you just weave your research through it? You said you probably went in circles and change things with the research? How did it work?
Yeah, the things I learned, and plus I also photocopied a lot. So at home I've got, not an Excel sheet like a normal person, I've got boxes of pages photocopied from the sort of books I've mentioned in the back. And then, they've got underlines or so forth, yeah.
Do you have any sort of visual things you stick up on your wall?
Not much room in our small house.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And also it's a mezzanine, so it's sort of, sloped. And also I'm not so visual, I think.
How long did your book take to research and write from go to woe?
4 years, 4 long years. But I wasn't doing it, full time. I was working a bit and doing other things, and I had an elderly father, and but it did take 4 years.
And you, Kate?
So, sorry, I can find, or I just find files on my computer that go back to 2016, and the story about the little girl that was in Best New Zealand Fiction, that was printed in 2009. So I've sort of had these ideas going around for a long time, I think. And in between, like you, I write short stories, and often, with my personality, it was a lot easier to write a short story, send it somewhere, and, writing a whole novel's a real thing. And what you said about people not finishing, often on Facebook there's a quote about how many people start novels and don't actually finish them. So that's good.
Claire, then, I think we've finished my short, sharp questions, which got a little bit, looser in the answers than I probably a good quiz master would have liked, but they were very interesting, thank you. Claire, did you start with the idea of the fairer side? Really?
No, I didn't. I started not really knowing what I would do, to be honest. So I just started researching, and then I looked at this huge number of gardens and thought, well, how can I make sense of it all? And then I just began thinking about, there was a list of, Buxton published a list of 260 gardens that he had worked on, or completed, I should say, and there were 12 women on that. And so I had actually looked at the women, or those 12 women already, because I thought they were interesting. I thought only 12 women out of all those people. So then I thought, well, probably actually a lot of the gardens that are attributed to men were actually really wanted by their wives, and that the men paid for them and had their names on the plans, but it was the women who wanted them. And I mean, even today, I run a garden club, and I think there's one male member out of 85 members. It's just very much a women's thing, particularly the sort of gardens he was doing, which were ornamental essentially. They did have vegetable gardens and orchards and things, but basically they were beautiful ornamental pleasure gardens. So then I sort of thought, okay, women, and of course I'd interviewed Jane, and I'd interviewed a few other people, women who'd grown up in gardens, and it seemed to be the women who were preserving his legacy as well. So I decided to focus on the women.
Interesting. So was that not far into it, or did you...
Oh, it was probably a year or so at least. And of course roses, women and roses sort of go together. It was just, I don't know, it just all seemed to fit. And then my husband came up with the idea of the title, which he's very proud.
I was going to say, it was very good, very good.
And I just thought, oh, well,
Except the grandson of Alfred Buxton misread it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He thought, the title is The Fairer Side of Buxton, Alfred Buxton's Gardens and the Women Who Loved Them. And he thought it was The Fairer Side of Buxton, Alfred Buxton's Gardens and the Women Who Loved Him. And... And he was a bit worried about what he might find when he, opened the cover.
Yeah.
But
it was
yeah,
quite fun, really, wasn't it? He was fun.
He was fun.
Enjoyed
he was good. He was really
element.
good.
He was probably a little disappointed.
Maybe.
Because actually Alfred was a one-woman man.
He was, very much so.
If we've read him correctly, yes.
Yeah. No, I don't think he had time to have a woman on the side. He's a very busy man.
Designing gardens, yeah, fantastic. So Kate, for you... you had this girl and you wanted to get in her head and her story, but you were also in the head of the soldier as well. Mm-hmm. So that would have been a bit of a leap, was it? How did you get in there? Where did you go? Where did you research, I guess? Or
Oh, that's a tricky one. It's a novel, and I'm a writer. So he's not really anyone. Sometimes I say that he actually came to me to tell his story because he was quite an easy character to write. The hardest one, just saying, was the girl that sort of links it all, the Australian. She was much harder to sort of make her a person, but Michael came along fairly easily. The other thing I can just say is my first, draft, etc., or later, it was sort of unfolding with a mystery, and then you've discovered Michael towards the end of the book. And then the publishers came back, we love it, blah, blah, blah. But we think he's so interesting, he should be at the beginning. So there was a lot of restructuring and rewriting. right up till the end, I think. So he became a lot more in the front of the story rather than this elusive character that was in the background.
And how did you get yourself, still this is for you, Kate, how did you handle the Māori elements in the story?
Excuse me. Well, I was very conscious that my story was an Irishman fighting with the English who'd taken their land. You know, Catholics couldn't own land. It was the famine, you name it. And so I was conscious of wanting to see it through his view. And the more I researched, there were comments that came up where it said how upset, which I quote somewhere, how upset these people were when they realised they were taking land, just fighting to get land that could be given to the English settlers. So, and 2/3 of the people in the British Army at that time were actually Irish, including like the captains and so forth. So you have to look at why were they fighting with the English, what was going on in their world. Yeah, things like that.
Interesting.